This security footage sent our HOA president to prison. What you're watching right now isn't just vandalism, it's a felony in progress. All because I dared to renovate my pool. By sunrise, this woman would be handcuffed in her Lululemon leggings, my cameras capturing every illegal move. But the wildest twist? Her cement truck stunt exposed a conspiracy that bankrupted a real estate empire. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is how a $75,000 pool renovation destroyed a criminal enterprise. For context, this pool was my late father's dream. Every citation felt like pouring concrete on his memory. The first warning came disguised as petty bureaucracy, a citation for grass, 1/4 inch too tall. But when my security camera caught Patricia directing a cement truck at midnight, I realized our HOA president wasn't just power-hungry. She was orchestrating a property value massacre. It all started last spring when I decided to update my backyard pool. The original 1990s design was showing its age, and after a particularly successful year at my architectural firm, I had the funds to give it a proper facelift. I followed every protocol in our HOA handbook to the letter, submitted detailed plans, included material samples, and even created a 3D rendering to show the minimal visual impact from the street. The renovation would update tile work, add some modern safety features, and install energy-efficient equipment. Nothing outrageous, just a tasteful modernization. The plans sailed through the initial HOA review board meeting with 4 out of 5 members voting in favor. The only dissenting vote came from Patricia Wellington, our newly elected HOA president. I should have recognized the warning signs when she spent 15 minutes arguing that the proposed blue tiles were too Mediterranean for our traditional American neighborhood. But I had the majority approval, so I scheduled the work to begin the following month. But why would tile choice warrant such hostility? The answer involves offshore accounts and a very stupid spreadsheet no one was meant to see. That's when the letters started arriving. First, it was a notice about my grass being 1/4 inch too tall. Then came a warning about my mailbox being insufficiently reflective. When I installed a security camera doorbell, which was explicitly permitted in our HOA guidelines, I received a citation for surveillance equipment visible from the street. Each letter was signed with Patricia's signature, complete with a little smiley face that somehow made it feel more threatening. The pool renovation began on schedule, and that's when Patricia really ramped up her campaign. She would park her white Mercedes SUV across the street every morning, photographing the workers and taking notes on her iPad. When I confronted her about it, she smiled that saccharine smile and said, "Oh, I'm just documenting all the violations for our monthly meetings, sweetie. Someone has to maintain our community standards." I tried to be reasonable. I invited her to inspect the work up close, offered to show her the approved plans again, and even suggested we discuss her concerns over coffee. Her response? "I don't fraternize with rule breakers. It sets a bad precedent." Mind you, this was the same woman who had somehow gotten approval for a giant topiary shaped like a unicorn in her front yard. The HOA amendments had one fatal flaw, page 63, paragraph 2. Even Patricia didn't realize I'd built my career on finding those flaws. The renovation was nearly complete when I received an emergency notice from the HOA. According to Patricia, an anonymous concerned resident had reported that my pool's new depth markers were in Arial font instead of the traditional Times New Roman specified in section 7.3.2 of the pool guidelines. The notice demanded I cease all work immediately pending a special review session, which couldn't be scheduled for another 6 weeks due to procedural requirements. I'll admit I lost my cool a bit at that point. I marched over to Patricia's house, guidelines in hand, ready to point out that there was no such font specification anywhere in the documents. She opened her door wearing a tennis outfit and holding a glass of white wine, though it was barely 11 a.m. "Oh, Sarah," she said, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "I was just about to call you. The board has received several more complaints about your little project. I'm afraid we'll have to add those to the review agenda as well." That's when I noticed she had a copy of the HOA guidelines on her entry table, and it looked significantly thicker than mine. When I asked about the discrepancy, she just smiled and said, "This is the president's copy. It has all the amendments that haven't been formally distributed yet. We have to maintain some executive privileges, don't we?" I left her house seething but determined to handle this professionally. I emailed the entire HOA board requesting an emergency meeting to address these issues. 3 board members responded sympathetically, apparently unaware of these supposed amendments Patricia kept citing. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, much to Patricia's obvious displeasure when she was copied on the confirmation email. What we found in Patricia's amended rulebook wasn't just shady. It was a roadmap to bankrupt our neighborhood. And entry 47th? Mandatory Times New Roman signed by a developer named Frank. The night before the meeting, I was working late at my home office when my phone pinged motion detected. I swiped open the feed and froze. Patricia was waving a flashlight, shouting at workers to pour faster, but she was standing directly over. Oh God, the power line. I was sprinting downstairs when, crack, the screen went black. Smoke, screams, and one thought, I just witnessed attempted murder. Because Patricia Wellington was so focused on supervising her midnight cement delivery, she failed to notice three very important things. The unmarked police car parked down the street conducting a routine patrol, the fact that she'd triggered my new security floodlights, and most importantly, that she was standing on the exact spot where my pool contractor had carefully marked a major underground power line. The next few minutes were pure chaos. The security floodlights had activated my new camera system's automatic recording feature, capturing crystal clear footage as Patricia imperiously directed the cement truck workers to just start pumping it in. I have full homeowners association authority. The workers, who looked increasingly uncomfortable, kept trying to show her something on their phones, probably the permit requirements for filling in a residential pool. That's when Officer James Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing from his patrol car, decided to investigate the unusual midnight construction activity. He walked up just as Patricia was saying, I don't care what your company policy is. I'm paying triple your normal rate specifically so we can do this now. I'll never forget the look on Patricia's face when the officer cleared his throat and said, Ma'am, I'm going to need to see the permits for this work. She spun around so fast she almost lost her balance, designer athleisure wear glowing eerily in the security lights. Officer, thank goodness you're here. Patricia switched to her sugar-sweet voice. This pool has been declared a community hazard by the Homeowners Association. I'm simply executing an emergency abatement order. She reached into her Lululemon jacket and pulled out what appeared to be an official-looking document. Officer Rodriguez took the paper and studied it carefully. Ma'am, this appears to be an HOA meeting agenda with some handwritten notes. That's not a legal permit for construction work, especially not at midnight on someone else's property. That's when I decided to speak up. Officer, I'm the homeowner, and I definitely didn't authorize this. I held up my phone to show I'd been recording everything. The cement truck workers looked relieved and quickly started packing up their equipment. Patricia's face went through an impressive range of emotions, before settling on righteous indignation. This is a private community matter. You have no jurisdiction here. She actually stamped her foot, which would have been comical if she hadn't been trying to destroy my $75,000 pool renovation. Officer Rodriguez remained professionally calm. Ma'am, attempting to pour cement into someone's pool without their permission could constitute several criminal offenses, including attempted vandalism and criminal mischief. I'm going to have to ask everyone to provide identification. Patricia's response was to turn to the cement truck workers and screech, I'll sue your company if you leave. I had a verbal contract. The workers practically sprinted to their truck. As they drove away, Patricia pulled out her phone and started frantically texting. This is all a misunderstanding. I'm contacting our HOA attorney right now. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. At midnight? That's when we all heard a loud crackling sound, followed by a pop and the smell of burning plastic. Remember that underground power line I mentioned? Apparently, Patricia's pacing had cracked the temporary protective covering the contractors had placed over it. The security lights flickered, and suddenly half the block went dark. Officer Rodriguez immediately called for backup in the power company. As we waited, Patricia kept insisting this was all a simple misunderstanding, but her story kept changing. First, it was an emergency HOA action. Then it was a pre-approved pool removal project that I had supposedly signed off on months ago. Finally, she claimed she was doing me a favor because my pool renovation was reducing property values. The power company arrived quickly, along with 2 more police officers. As they assessed the damage, I noticed Patricia's phone buzzing constantly. She kept declining calls from a number labeled Frank Erg. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that phone number would turn out to be crucial evidence in what happened next. But why risk felony charges over tile? The answer involves offshore accounts and a very stupid spreadsheet. The officers took statements from everyone, and though they were professional about it, I could tell they were struggling not to react to Patricia's increasingly bizarre justifications. When she demanded they arrest me for HOA violations, Officer Rodriguez patiently explained that HOA rules are civil matters, not criminal ones. But what she's doing to our property values is criminal, Patricia insisted. Do you know what Mediterranean blue tile does to a traditional American neighborhood's aesthetic integrity? One of the other officers had to turn away to hide his smile. As the night wore on, several neighbors came out to see what was happening. Patricia tried to rally support, but her midnight pool filling scheme wasn't winning her any fans. Mrs. Chen from across the street, who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years, just shook her head and said, "I remember when HOAs were about community, not control." By 3 a.m., the power was restored, and the officers had everything they needed for their report. They advised me to file for a restraining order and document any further incidents. Patricia was issued a citation for the damaged power line and told not to enter my property again. As she walked back to her house, she turned and called out, "This isn't over. The HOA board will hear about this tomorrow." What Patricia didn't know was that the board would indeed hear about it tomorrow, but not from her. Because while she was dealing with the police, I had been forwarding the security camera footage to every board member, along with a detailed timeline of her escalating harassment. But even I couldn't have predicted how quickly things would unravel for Patricia Wellington once the sun came up, or how that mysterious Frank who kept calling her would end up being the key to exposing a scheme that went far beyond our little neighborhood pool dispute. The next morning, I called into work and spent 2 hours meeting with my lawyer, sharing videos, emails, and screenshots of every interaction with Patricia. As we reviewed the evidence, my lawyer's expression shifted from concern to incredulous to slightly gleeful. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, "I don't often say this, but I think you should let me contact the district attorney's office. This goes beyond simple harassment." While my lawyer worked her magic, I attended an emergency HOA board meeting that had been called by the other members. Patricia was notably absent, sending a text claiming she had a previous commitment. The other board members were horrified by the security footage. That's when the real revelations started pouring in. Board member Janet Wilson had been quietly investigating some irregularities in the HOA's financial records. She discovered that Patricia had been artificially inflating violation fines and directing the excess funds to a separate account. The mysterious Frank who kept calling Patricia? He was Franklin Morris, a local real estate developer known for buying out struggling HOA communities at steep discounts. The scheme was breathtaking in its audacity. Patricia had been working with Frank to systematically decrease our property values through aggressive enforcement and arbitrary rule changes. Meanwhile, Frank's company had been secretly buying up underwater properties in our neighborhood. Once they controlled enough units, they planned to dissolve the HOA entirely and redevelop the land into luxury condos. My pool renovation hadn't just annoyed Patricia, it had threatened their entire plan. A well-maintained property with modern amenities would have increased surrounding property values, making their takeover more expensive. That's why she had become so desperate to stop it. The district attorney's office was very interested in this information, particularly because it crossed county lines and involved multiple properties. By that afternoon, Patricia was being questioned by investigators. They found spreadsheets on her computer detailing the scheme, along with emails to Frank discussing their strategy. The best part? She'd been using the HOA's official email account for everything, making it all admissible evidence. The next few weeks were intense. Patricia was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including fraud, conspiracy, and attempted vandalism. Frank turned state's evidence against her in exchange for a lighter sentence. Local news crews camped outside our neighborhood, interviewing residents about the HOA corruption scandal. One particularly creative reporter dubbed it Cement Gate. The most satisfying moment came during Patricia's arraignment. She showed up in court wearing designer clothes and her trademark condescending smile, clearly expecting to charm her way out of trouble. But when the judge started reading the charges and mentioned the potential 10-year sentence, her smile cracked like cheap paint. Her lawyer immediately started negotiating a plea deal. In the end, Patricia accepted a plea bargain, 2 years in prison, substantial fines, and she had to pay restitution to all the homeowners she'd fraudulently fined. She was also barred from serving on any HOA board ever again. Frank's company was hit with heavy fines and forced to sell back the properties they'd acquired. The aftermath brought some unexpected positive changes to our community. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Chen, rewrote our bylaws to be more reasonable and transparent. All financial records are now publicly accessible to residents, and fines must be approved by a committee rather than any single board member. They even approved my pool renovation unanimously, Mediterranean blue tiles and all. My pool was finally completed last week. To celebrate, I hosted a neighborhood pool party. As I watched kids splashing in the water and neighbors chatting on the new deck, Mrs. Chen raised her glass in a toast. To Sarah, she said, who reminded us that sometimes fighting back is the best way to bring a community together. I couldn't help but smile when someone suggested we should add a small plaque by the pool commemorating the incident. Proposed text: "This pool survived cement, corruption, and Karen, so did we." The last I heard, Patricia is adjusting poorly to prison life. Apparently, she tried to start an inmate advisory committee to regulate the color of prison uniforms. It didn't go over well. The guard who told me this story mentioned that her fellow inmates now call her the HOA Karen and have unanimously voted to reject her proposed changes to the exercise yard rules. As for me, I'm enjoying my beautiful new pool, secure in the knowledge that my security cameras are always recording, just in case any other HOA presidents get creative ideas about midnight construction projects. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning, it's about making sure positive change comes from the victory. As I float under these Mediterranean blue tiles, I wonder, does your HOA president have a frank? Are they taking community standards a little too seriously? Because if you're getting citations for mailbox reflectivity, you might want to check what's buried under their unicorn topiary.